Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. Second show tonight. This one's coming up with Bob Salas. Joining us about a half hour in will be Kevin Randle. And we're basically discussing the kind of silly article that came out in the Wall Street Journal the other day, last Saturday, I believe it was. Everybody in the UFO world is talking about it. If you read it through, I will have the link below. You can read it. It's actually behind the paywall link, and you can read that and see kind of how ridiculous it is. Now, there always has been some type of misinformation along the lines of they were very happy that people were seeing the stealth fighter and things like that before it was released to the public for public knowledge. People thought it was a UFO, and they kind of like fed that fire because that helped. They didn't want it to be out there for whoever else, adversaries, to know about it, whatever. So there is always a little bit of that, but the Wall Street Journal really took it quite far, in my opinion. Just my opinion, of course. Let's see. The blog this week is UFO Occupants in the 1978 NICAP UFO Chronology by Charles Lear. Check that out. Also, I just wanted to let everyone know that this week, later on, Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, we have Paul Hynek, J. Allen Hynek's son. He's on to talk about AI. He calls it augmented intelligence, artificial intelligence, and UFOs. It's a great interview and very enjoyable. I pre-recorded it at Contact in the Desert. I will be in the show live, to open it and all that. But anyway, please come back on Friday. So we are going to be running a couple shows a week. 3 shows this week is a little unusual, but I'm really glad to do it because I think it was a timely event. And with Bill's help, I got Bob tonight, and I'm glad that he was able to join me. Anyone can support the show. I do thank all those who do, and I also thank everyone that watches and listens to the show. I will be watching in chat tonight. If some pertinent questions come up for Bob Salas, I will post them and ask those questions. It has to really work with the flow and everything. And anyway, I'm going to bring Bob in right now. Bob, welcome.
Well, thank you, Martin. Good to be with you again.
I know we've been running into each other all over the country quite a bit this last year. It's always a pleasure. Washington, D.C., I forgot about that. You were at the UFO, the UAP hearing.
That was last November, I think.
That was, and it was freezing cold in the middle of the night, wasn't it? It was terrible. Yeah. But anyway, it was good to see you and your wife out at Contact a couple of days ago, it seems like, and a lot of fun out there. But anyway, so the article comes out. How quickly did you hear? I think it was Saturday, wasn't it, that it came out? That's when I heard about it anyway.
June 6th is when it came out.
Okay, so Friday. Yep.
Yeah.
But anyway, how quickly did you hear about that?
Was it right away? I heard the part that I got a call from one of the authors, Schechtman is his last name. The day before the article was published, he called and said he wanted to send a photographer out to my home to take photographs for use in the article. And I asked him, well, it sounds like you're going to publish it. He said, yeah, but it may not be what you expect. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we've come across some information that indicates the missile shutdowns might have been caused by EMP, electromagnetic pulse. And I said, that's ridiculous. And I said, we looked into that a little bit. And I think when we were writing our first book, Faded Giant, we published in 2005. We actually wrote in that book about the issue of the EMP that could result from a nuclear blast nearby the facility and what impact it might have. There were some tests done by the Air Force but not at an operational site. And that's what he was telling me they were going to claim in the piece that he was writing. I said, if you do that, I will challenge you rigorously, because that's ridiculous. And I told him a couple of reasons off the top of my head. But more after the article came out, I was able to write down about 14, I think, bullet points as to why that never happened. So we can talk about those, or
Yeah.
people can go to my X post, which I put up yesterday, and they can download my document that has all these bullet points on why this is ridiculous thing to even suggest.
Well, Bob, before I mean, one of the things I have to say is, unfortunately, few people are going to see this show compared to, I don't know what the readership is of the Wall Street Journal. Is it in the millions? Is that possible? I don't really know what, I mean, I'm just uneducated guessing. It's in at least several hundred thousands, I would imagine. And it's just a shame because, when people see something like this in print in a paper like that, everyone's going to take it for, face value. And I think it's very sad and a shame. And, I know you said that you sent this to the author, or you were going to, have you sent it and have you gotten a reply?
Yesterday, I sent my rebuttal, 3 pages of rebuttal, to the Wall Street Journal editor, and I asked that she publish it in the Wall Street Journal, because what they printed, and they named me in the article. They have my name there.
Right.
And I've been talking about this for 30 years or so in 16 countries all over the U.S. on radio and television, etc. And telling my story. I never said anything about the possibility of EMP being the cause of the missile shutdowns. So they're essentially, this is a slap in the face, if you will, a false narrative. It's, in my estimation, it's a disinformation attempt to discredit my story, and not only mine, but other similar stories. Remember, there was one incident in 1966, very similar to mine. Dave Shindell was stationed at Minot Air Force Base when he relieved a crew, and was told that UFOs shut down those missiles, all 10 of them. And then 6 months later, Echo Flight was March 16th at Malmstrom Air Force Base. And I've spoken, of course, with the men in charge of that facility. Again, UFOs came over, shut their missiles down, and then mine happened on March 24th. So if this was EMP test, as claimed in this article, why didn't they learn results, impact from those other 2? And again, they would have to claim that the same thing happened there. Also, he claims that he received this information, he, the writer, and the writer's name is, I want to get it right.
Shindell, or I've got it somewhere.
Joel Schechtman.
Oh, Schechtman. Yeah, that's it. Joel Schechtman.
And
yep.
A lady by the name of Aruna Viswanatha.
Yep, that's right.
But they're claiming they got their information from Arrow. Now, I gave a long 2.5 hour presentation to Arrow in February 15th, 2023. I was applauded by Arrow, called a patriot, and they thought I did a great job. I've got this in writing. They never asked me about the possibility of EMP. And this is what Schechtman is claiming now, that he got this information from Arrow, that they were able to find a terrestrial explanation, is what he called it. But I asked Arrow at the end of my presentation, I said, are you going to check with the Air Force about the veracity of what I just told you? And they said no. And I said, why not? And they said, well, because they tried to check with the Air Force on other stories they had heard, and we're not getting any cooperation from them. So apparently that must have changed somewhere down the line. But at any rate, there's a lot wrong with this story.
Now, do you want to first of all go back to the story itself, and
sure,
and I can kind of read to when I do that, and I'll bring that up here in just a second, and so we can basically read what they're saying, and just so the public knows why you're here and want to basically talk about this here, because right here, I'm just going to, let me just check a few things here. Kind of see it, not too well, but all right. So right here, it says, do you mind if I read this through real quickly?
Oh, go ahead.
All right. A bunker in Montana, Kirkpatrick investigated another mystery that stretched back 60 years. In 1967, Robert Salas, now 84, was, isn't that nice they mentioned your age, was an Air Force captain sitting in a walk-in closet-sized bunker, manning the controls of 10 nuclear missiles in Montana. He was prepared to launch apocalyptic strikes should Soviet Russia ever attack first, and got a call around 8 p.m. from one night from the guard station above. A glowing reddish-orange oval was hovering over the front gate, Salas told Kirkpatrick's investigators. The guards had their rifles drawn, pointed at the oval object appearing to float above the gate. A horn sounded in the bunker, signaling a problem with the control system. All 10 missiles were disabled. Salas soon learned a similar event occurred at other silos nearby. Were they under attack? Salas never got an answer. The next morning, a helicopter was waiting to take Salas back to the base. Once there, he was ordered never to discuss the incident. Salas was one of 5 men interviewed by Kirkpatrick's team who witnessed such events in the 1960s and 70s. While sworn to secrecy, the men began sharing their stories in the 90s in books and documentaries. Kirkpatrick's team dug into the story and discovered the terrestrial explanation. The barriers of concrete and steel surrounding the America's nuclear missiles were thick enough to give them a chance, if hit first by a Soviet strike, but scientists at the time feared an intense storm of electromagnetic waves generated by nuclear detonation might render the hardware needed to launch a counterstrike unusable. To test the vulnerability, the Air Force developed an exotic electromagnetic generator that simulated this pulse of disruptive energy without the need to detonate a nuclear weapon. When activated, this device, placed on a portable platform 60 feet above the facility, would gather power until it glowed, sometimes with a blinding orange light. It would then fire a burst of energy that could resemble lightning. And there's a sketch of the, like a pattern of the cone structure here. The electromagnetic pulses snake down cables connected to the bunker where the launch commanders like Salas sat, disrupting the guidance system, disabling the weapons, and haunting the men to this day. But any public leak of the tests at the time would have allowed Russia to know that America's nuclear arsenal could be disabled in a first strike. The witnesses were kept in the dark. To this day, Salas believes he was party to an intergalactic intervention to stop nuclear war, which the government has tried to hide. He is half right. The experience left the octogenarian deeply skeptical of the U.S. military and its ability to tell the truth. There is a gigantic cover-up, not only by the Air Force, but by every other federal agency has cognizance of this subject. He said in an interview with the Journal, "We were never briefed on the activities that we were going on. The Air Force shut us out of any information." Concealing the truth from men like Salas and deliberate efforts to target the public with disinformation unleashed within the halls of the Pentagon itself a dangerous force which could become almost unstoppable as decades pass. The paranoid mythology of U.S. military helped spread now has hold over the growing number of its own senior officials who account themselves as believers. The crisis grew to a boil over a piece of metal mailed late night radio in 1996, which the sender had been told was part of a crashed spaceship. That's another topic. But anyway, so that's kind of the story there. That is the story of what they said about you. I don't think I've ever read that much before live.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I'll make a couple of comments first. If anybody in your audience wants to see what these so-called EMP generators that can put out something like 6 to 7 million volts of energy, they can Google that EMP generators and see photographs of what we're talking about, and I would suggest it if they're interested, because what it would have taken to put that generator out there near our front gate was a construction project that would have taken a couple of days at least to do, required pouring concrete bases for these posts, 60-foot posts, and then putting up a platform, and then somehow with a crane they can lift a very heavy object on top of this platform, all of which would have been seen, of course, by the guards we had patrolling our launch control facility
24/7.
24/7.
They couldn't have snuck it in. It's impossible, in other words.
No, this was not mobile, as they stated. Anyway, and the other thing they said in this article was that cables were snaked down to where our launch control center was located, which was 60 feet underground. I don't know how they would have gotten these cables down there, number one. Number two, our facility down there was a reinforced concrete, reinforced with steel concrete, um, well, facility that was impenetrable, and we had a huge blast door that could not be opened without our help. So I don't know how they were able to snake any cables down there in the first place. We would have known about that.
Right. Here's a question someone has here, but how would this EMP attack explain how the system came back online? Wouldn't the EMP attack fry the system completely?
That's another good point. This was just a gross way of sending energy, EMP, a very high voltage, like I said. And it could have, if they had actually done that, it could have fried our equipment that we had down there. And that equipment was, of course, for command and control of the missiles. So that would have been highly irresponsible and to fry the equipment, number one. Number two, some spurious signal like that could have had an impact on the launch of the missiles. In other words, it might have even launched the missiles uh, because
Jeez.
that's the control systems that we had to do that. So it wasn't like they were going to use a pinpoint accuracy with a very small electrical signal to do this, which was, by the way Boeing finally discovered a way to shut down what's called a logic coupler temporarily, and caused the guidance and control failure that eventually shut down our missiles. It was a small electrical signal. It wasn't a gross 6 million volt signal that did that. But at any rate, yeah.
Another thing, Bob, before you move on from this, one of the things I wanted to ask, and I hope I didn't break your train of thought there, but the red glowing object that the guy was in fear of, that thing was hovering over, this particular way the EMT would work, that wouldn't exactly be the same thing.
No,
You,
it would have been a very short burst of energy.
right. Yeah.
It wouldn't be a glowing ball of light that hovered for minutes, at least over the front gate, is what was reported to me by those guards. Right.
And they were the one thing I didn't realize until I was reading that is I didn't realize that they were actually pointing the weapons, toward the thing. I mean, did they ask you if they should fire upon it?
They asked me what they should do because they were frightened. They didn't know what it was. It was an object. They had reported seeing these lights in the sky flying above us earlier, about 5 minutes earlier, and then all of a sudden this object appears right in front of them. They drew their weapons. They called me, said, "What do we do?" I said, "Make sure the security facility is secure. That's your job. Make sure nothing enters the fenced area. Uh, and do what you have to do." So that's basically what I told them. I have had correspondence with a gentleman who was a security guard that slept in the same barracks that they did, the guys I had upstairs, and he told me in writing that he had heard that one of the guards, at least, had discharged his weapon at this thing uh, to no effect. But that's all I know for sure because it was the secrecy was clamped down on us right after the event.
Hmm. Now, do you want to get into more of the bullet points of your rebuttal?
Well, we can. I already mentioned a couple. The first one I gave was I gave an over 2 hour presentation to Arrow, and at the end asked them if they were going to contact the Air Force. They said no. My second point was Air Force was certainly aware of the potential damage that could result from a nuclear blast nearby from EMP. That was well known from testing done well, in Nevada and other places, the scientists knew that a nuclear explosion does also emit an electromagnetic pulse, a high intensity. Um, and so the Air Force was properly trying to test for those effects. And in our book, Fated Giant, we actually have references to the tests that were done. They were done at locations like Space and Missile Systems Organization, which at that point was down in San Bernardino, California, or Hill Air Force Base. And they did do EMP testing, but never on an operational missile. These were missiles that were taken out of service for that purpose.
I'm going to be joining. Kevin's just joining us now too, so he's in for the ride here. Hi, Kevin Randle. How are you?
Hi, Kevin.
I'm fine. You're looking good. Hi,
Yeah.
Bob. How you doing?
Doing all right. You're looking okay yourself.
Thank you. I put a long piece up on my blog, sort of supporting some of the things you're saying there. I said some of the same things. They wouldn't be so stupid as to test an EM pulse on an active flight of missiles, because it takes them out and then it takes forever to get them back online. You have to replace the missiles. The circuitry's all fried.
Yeah, not to mention possibly frying us that were sitting down there. But
never thought of that.
Thank you for writing that article, Kevin. I appreciate it. It was well done.
Well, I also started out by pointing out some of the other stupid things in the article. I mean, we've got some kind of frat boy hazing going on in the Air Force. You join a unit, you're shown a top secret picture, and then you're told, don't tell anybody you've seen it. You have no need to know. You have to sign a NDA, and if you violate the NDA, you're liable to be executed. I mean, and that supposedly went on for decades.
Yeah,
absolutely.
In my case, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and they wouldn't give me a copy of it, so I had to sit there and read it. And one of the phrases I remember from that was, I would spend many years in Leavenworth prison if I ever revealed any of what happened at my incident to anyone. So yeah, it was pretty intimidating.
But the difference there, the difference was you were actually involved in the event, and these guys coming into a new unit are shown this picture that would have to have been classified top secret. They had no need to know, and never saw anything about that again. And then they're told, well, you know, if you disclose this information, you could be executed for it. Which I suppose you'd say, well, it was high treason, and yes, you could be executed for it. But I mean, it's just a ridiculous thing that they talked about. I also mentioned in the article, I guess their research only went back to 1971. I found that out later, but I'm thinking of significant cases that they've explained them all. The ridiculous Roswell explanation of a mogul balloon, and we can prove that there was no mogul flight on the dates that it was supposedly found. The Levelland, Texas sightings from November of 1957, which involved interaction with the environment, stalling car engines. The sheriff actually said at one point that he had hundreds of phone calls. I think it was more like dozens, but he had hundreds. He went out looking for the object. He got close to it, saw it was oval shaped or football shaped, he said, and his car stalled. And that would be the Texas Department of Public Safety with state troopers in it. And that car was followed by a car with Air Force officers in it. So the Air Force got close enough to have their cars stalled. And then the investigation was made. It took 7 hours. They sent E5 to do the investigation, and he came up with all kinds of nonsensical explanations. And suddenly the sheriff said, well, I didn't get that close. I was 900 yards away from it. I just saw a streak of red. Then later in 1975, Don Berliner interviewed the sheriff, and he was back telling the story of how he saw that object. The other thing Don Burlinson noticed, he's a researcher from New Mexico. He went to Level Land and he found the mechanic for the sheriff's department. And the mechanic told him that the next day the sheriff anything mechanically wrong with it, and there wasn't. So we've got some very good information about Level Land. There was also landing traces found on the ground. So you've got a case that had the interaction with the environment, installing the cars. You had Air Force officers involved in it, and you had the landing traces.
Yeah, I think the point you're probably making is there have been many good cases that they avoided talking about in this hit piece in the Wall Street Journal, and they just gave a broad brush to everything the witnesses have come up with, and said that they must have all been false statements that were fed to them by the intelligence community or Arrow. Anyway, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, it goes on. So, Bob, I don't know. Did you want to
bothered me was that.
Go ahead, Kevin. Kevin, I think you're having a little trouble with your computer.
What bothered me is the alleged journalist didn't do any.
Go ahead, Kevin.
We're having.
We'll
try again here. The alleged journalist didn't do any follow-up, didn't ask any pertinent questions, just accepted the information as if it was the gospel and didn't try to find out any more information about the cases that was written about in the Wall Street Journal article.
That's correct.
Put up the skeptical view of the Malmstrom missiles going offline.
I first talked to that journalist in March, early March, and he had plenty of time to call me and talk to me about this story that he heard, that this was the shutdowns were due to EMP. Well, he never called me and talked to me about that before they published the story. So to me, that was irresponsible of him. Certainly.
Well, we've seen like there
was a Boeing investigation. The Boeing investigation said that there was no evidence of an EMP because they had discussed that at that time, but they also ignored all the sightings around Belt, Montana, which is of course right there by Great Falls and Malmstrom Air Force Base. There was a landing involved there. Air Force personnel made sightings, deputy sheriffs made sightings, and the FAA had it on radar at one point. So, there was all kinds of evidence going on there. It wasn't just your story. It was all this other evidence to suggest something was going on.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned Dave. Was it Dave, Bob? That had a very similar thing?
Dave Schindel.
That's right. Yeah.
In 1966, he was stationed at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. Had a very similar incident. He relieved the crew who told him that UFOs were involved in the shutdown of their 10 missiles that prior evening. So within the period of 6 months.
He was at Warren Air Force Base?
No, Minot. So within a period of 6 months, we lost 30 nuclear missiles during UFO sightings. Now you're telling me, you're trying to convince people that this is what the Air Force did while testing EMP on the missiles? That doesn't make sense.
That's right. And you
Well,
think
I
about,
can understand them wanting to test the problems with EMP. I can understand that, but you
Yes,
don't
of
do
course.
it on an active missile.
That's
You
correct.
know, active missile flights. You don't do it. You take them out of the picture, and the EMP would fry the electronics. So you've got to replace all that, and it's something that they can't do in an hour or 2 hours. It's something that takes literally weeks or months
Right.
to do.
And then
So
going
you're
back to
taking
that
out
point,
all this retaliatory capability.
If that's what really happened, we couldn't have brought our missiles back up on alert within a couple of days, which is what we did. Those missiles, and I talked to Robert Jameson, who brought some of Oscar missiles back on alert. There was no damage to any of the equipment on the missile systems. No permanent damage, and firing 6 million bolts at the system would have caused some permanent damage, no doubt. So it's a ridiculous concept that they presented in that Wall Street Journal article.
just a question, Bob, when these missiles are out there, say you have 10
And that's the
missiles.
thing that bothers me. The reporter didn't say. What I'm saying is, the
Kevin,
reporter didn't ask if this wasn't a ridiculous thing to done.
Kevin, I think Martin had a point here to make.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's some real lagging going on in your end, Kevin. I'm not sure what the problem is with your internet, but it's like you're catching things when we're halfway through them. So
Yes, it's very distracting
yeah, and so
for the
but
listeners.
yeah. So the question I had for you, Bob, is when you have 10 missiles in your control, they're many miles apart, aren't they?
Yes, they're not right next to the launch control facility. They're about a mile or two or three away in a kind of a circle around this central launch control facility where I was.
And so that would be to knock down all 10 of them, is what I'm getting at, would be quite an ordeal to do that all at once. You know, I mean, to have it electromagnetically pulsed on these things that are all that distances. Now they say they put cables into the ground as well.
Well, we had what's called the sensitive information network cables that would send signals directly to each missile. And these cables were about 9 inches in diameter. They were triply shielded against electromagnetic interference.
Wow.
According to the statement in the Wall Street Journal, somehow they were able to snake some kind of a cable down through 60 feet of earth and concrete and setting up this apparatus to shoot EMP at it, and somehow penetrate the capsule, which is impossible. Our capsule was hardened. No penetrations of any kind. We had a big blast door that would protect anything trying to enter the capsule. So they would have to explain to me how exactly they were able to do that.
Yep. Anyway, I find it fascinating because, and Kevin, I'll ask you this. We've seen things like this in the past, haven't we? Where something like this comes out I mean, there's a lot of activity in the UFO, world right now with all these whistleblowers, et cetera, coming forward. Whatever you think about them, there's still a lot of activity, Congress, all that. And when everything gets,
Well-
heated up like this is a good distraction and a good, like, quiet it down type of situation. Put out something like this.
Well, as I mentioned in my blog posting on this, that we have seen this going back to 1953 with the CIA sponsored Robertson panel, where they suggested that they needed to publish a sighting that was very mysterious and then how they solved it. And that teachers should not allow students to read books on UFOs or make book reports on UFOs or do reports on UFOs. They wanted Disney to get involved in creating some kind of a program to debunk UFOs. And then we moved to the Condon Committee at the University of Colorado, that they wanted a scientific study. And if you read that document, we know from a letter that was written by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hippler to Robert Loeb on the committee saying, this is what we want you to find. The Air Force has done a good job of investigating UFOs. There's no scientific evidence or rationale for continuing the study, and the Air Force should close Project Blue Book. And lo and behold, 18 months later, those were the exact conclusions that the Condon Committee came up with. It wasn't a scientific investigation. My favorite explanation they came up with is they talked about a sighting in 1954, I believe, that was so they determined it was a natural phenomenon so rare it had never been seen before or since. And I'm thinking, I'm a scientist, and we've suddenly been exposed to this natural phenomenon that's that rare that maybe we should attempt to follow up on that. But no, they didn't want to do that. I think 25 or 30% of the sightings in the Condon report were unidentified. They didn't look at level land because it was 10 years too old and they couldn't find the cars and were having trouble finding the witnesses. We were finding the witnesses much later than that and talking to them and getting good information on the level land sightings. The Air Force decided that was ball lightning. And these sightings lasted for 2 or 3 hours in the level land Texas area. Ball lightning lasts 2 or 3 minutes. It's 18 to 24 inches in diameter. They're talking about a huge craft coming down, installing the car engines and landing close to them and being in view for 5 or 10 minutes before it left, and then people could start their cars again. So yes, it's been going on literally for more than half a century, nearly 3/4 of a century, I guess, where they've just made up explanations, and too often the mainstream media is too sophisticated to believe in flying saucers and little green men. So they ridicule it and they don't ask the tough questions. They don't follow up on it. And all that information now is out there on the internet. You can find it and look at it and see how accurate some of that information is, but they seem to ignore it.
Yep. It's like they picked through the information, and but Kevin, you made it a point earlier too that they talk about hazing and things like that. That's just seems absolutely ridiculous and unbelievable that they would do some of the things that they're claiming through that.
Well, yeah, or the public deception of well, it was just one of our spy planes. We can now tell you it's a spy plane. I'll freely admit I've seen video of the F-117 fighter coming down to land, and it looks for all the world like a dome disc with a tricycle landing gear on. But as you watch it for a while, it resolves itself. I can understand that when they're testing it, they would want that not to get out to our competitors in the world. But we now know what it was like. So it's just ridiculous explanations of what they were doing at the time. And I made that comment on my blog posting about being a bunch of frat boys doing these sorts of things. It's just something that's not professional. You just don't do that sort of thing.
Now the interesting thing is, Bob, you're saying that they were actually
people come forward and talk about this in the past where they've been inadvertently exposed to some of this information. I would have thought the processing of security clearance would cover it.
Yeah. Kevin, I'm afraid we're having a lot of trouble with your internet, and we keep walking over each other. so I don't know what to do at this point.
Well, I was going to say I'll punch out here, and you can. I mean, Bob can tell you much more about what he did and what he was doing in the Air Force than what I was doing in the Air Force. So I think I've made the points that I wanted to make, which was the Wall Street Journal report was just ridiculous. It was unfair to Bob, which is why I put up the long posting that I did and mentioned some of these other things that, from my experience as an intelligence officer in the Air Force, I just could not believe they would do those sorts of things, that you do not get exposed to top secret material just because you have a top secret clearance. You have to have a need to know that information. And it strikes me from reading that it was, well, here's a picture of a UFO. Don't tell anybody you saw it. What was his need to know to see that picture? It was exposing a top secret to an awful lot of people, which would enhance the possibility of compromise. So I'll punch out here. I've made the points that I wanted to make, and I wanted to thank Bob for his service in bringing all of this forward.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
He's hearing it, but it's taking a while. Okay. All right. So yeah, we'll get back. Let's get back to your rebuttal, and we can just kind of go through that. Let me just remove this here. But but one of the things I want to ask you that I'm curious about, so you heard from the author all the way back in March, you said, right?
That's right.
And did he make it sound like he was writing something about your incident, but he didn't give you any clue to the point that he was trying to debunk the whole thing?
That's correct. He just wanted me to, answer some questions he had about my incident, had me go through it again. And I had a good feeling. And of course, I was anxious for him to write an article in the Wall Street Journal, because I thought this would give more publicity to my incident.
It sure did.
From a reliable newspaper, but as it turned out, like I said, I think it was a designed hit piece.
Yeah.
I don't know why they did that, but I've got my suspicions. It was an intentional attempt to discredit my story.
Absolutely. And, there's been other people, Brian Dunning, who's tried to do that as well. And I watched a documentary that he did, and it was rather pathetic. If someone can make a really good point, fine. But, to bring things up that don't make any sense and think that other people are buying it, and some people will buy it. And a lot of people will never read your rebuttal or know about your rebuttal and just take the whole thing as it was a fact. And it's really a shame that he kind of led you along like that and then wrote this piece. So, but anyway, here's some of the points here. And I don't know if you want to read any of them here. I'm at 3, 4, 5, and 6. But I mean, what do you think is the most dramatic point that you're making here in the rebuttal?
Well, I think they're all good points to indicate that this couldn't have happened. For example, number 3 was we all had high security clearances. We were all briefed prior to going up on alert status to the missile sites about any activity going on in the field. And even if this was a classified program, we should have been briefed that our missiles might have been affected, because it was our job to maintain operational status with our nuclear force. It was during the Cold War, of course, and we were fighting a war in Vietnam, and we had just had the Cuban Missile Crisis not long before that. So it would have been irresponsible, senseless to jeopardize not having our full force ready to retaliate in the event of an attack. So these are just part of the points I make. Another one is the fear that the crew, the security people expressed was real. I could hear it in their voices.
Mm-hmm.
And if this had been some kind of a test, they wouldn't have been afraid. They would have known what the purpose and what the reason of what they were looking at.
Right. Right. And when you gave your 2-hour presentation, you mentioned that they clapped or whatever. Were you actually there in person, or was this on the phone?
Well, this was a phone interview.
Right. I know that's what they did, a lot of them that way.
Yeah.
Kirkpatrick I'm guessing, was not there, or was he?
No, he was not. These were
Yeah.
two other men that worked for him. But they certainly appreciated my diligence in my research and what I presented to them in documentation. They asked for copies of everything, which I sent to them. And in those emails that followed is where they applauded my efforts. Yeah, so I've got all that in writing. In addition, I recorded audio recording of the entire interview, and I told them I would do that. So they knew that. I've got everything recorded.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I've talked to a few other people that say they have testified, and then they never heard anything. I mean, they did at least reply to you, but
Yes.
it just seems like, okay, and what do they call it? Log it and dog it, whatever it is, but not that they're going to
Well,
really pay much attention to it.
yeah, and one of the emails they sent, they said, your account is now an official historical record of our office of a UAP incident. So from that, I take it that the Congress should be able to access everything I said and presented, since it's a so-called official record.
Right. Right. Well, Bob, it's been a real pleasure, and who knows where we're going to meet again. It's been, I think, 3 or 4 times within the last year, but maybe a while for next time. But it's always been a real pleasure talking to you. And I'm sorry that you have to go through this. You don't deserve it. It's not right, and especially when he was actually working with you and led you down this path. So I just feel really bad that this had to happen, and it must be very discouraging for you.
Well, I'm going to keep pressing the Wall Street Journal to publish what I wrote in Rebuttal, and I'll just keep pressing until they give me some satisfaction in one way or another. So let's just leave it at that. I'm not just going to forgive this.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Bob. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin.
All right. Take care. Yeah.
Okay,
Bye
you
now.
too.
All right, everyone. So we will be back Friday with again with Paul Hynek, and that's a 6 p.m. show. And then next week we have Chad Wainless and Professor David Brian Palachuk. They'll be on, and then the following Friday we also have a show. So 2 times a week we'll be having the show here. And thank you so much for participating in the chat and watching live and listening. However you watch the show, thank you very much. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.